Welcome to the Titan Leader Talk. I'm Madison Sheehan, your host tonight. We've got a really great guest on, coach from Miami University of Ohio. She is one of the most winningest coaches in the program history. She's been the MAC Coach of the Year. She's coached at Oklahoma State, Syracuse, as well as played for Virginia Tech, multiple conference championships, conference awards, and things like that. I'm really excited to have our next guest on. Strong female leader with a great program down at Miami. Coach Crowell, how are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you all having me on. I watched a few of your podcasts, and in particular, watched Coach Barton and Coach John Hauser. So really excited about what you all are doing, and even more excited about the opportunities for females to be on your podcast. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We're really excited about today. Just to go ahead and get started, why don't you, before we kind of dive into everything we're going to talk about, I think we're going to have a really great conversation about team culture, team leaders, and kind of everything that you guys do and how your program is built down in Miami. And to go ahead and get started, you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and how you got here?
Yeah, so kind of you've touched on kind of my journey, but I played at Virginia Tech. I was a pitcher utility type player. Stayed on staff my fifth year. I had to finish up school, and I served as a volunteer assistant. I always knew that I wanted to get into this profession, but I knew a graduate degree was important. So had an opportunity to go to Ohio University as a graduate assistant year one, then actually got promoted to the first assistant year two, ended up getting my degree, went to Syracuse for a year, had a great experience there, and then fortunate enough to go out to Oklahoma State and coach 6 years there. Just had a fantastic experience out there, and we had a couple of great teams, was able to go to the World Series. And now I'm at Miami University, just right down the road from Columbus, and just loving it and I've loved every single minute of it. And I've been here now for 8 years. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that with us, Coach. I think it'll be great to dive into everything that you've built. You've been a head coach at Miami for a little while now. And so you just want to dive in. Your team culture is, how you guys are leading, things like that for us.
So as everyone can see today, we're going to be talking about culture. It's a topic that I've become really passionate about, because the older I get, the more experience I have as a head coach. You really realize the importance of it. And I really do feel that having a strong culture will lead to a successful program. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing, what is culture? There's a lot of coaches who talk on this, a lot of leaders in different worlds that talk about this. And, you pull it up. I think it's an ambiguous term because there's so many different meanings. But for me, I think, and this is just one of them, I went on Google and this is what popped up. But to me, I don't think it's important to necessarily define what it is. But I do think it's important for all leaders to have an idea of what it is for their program. So with that being said, my beliefs on culture. So for me, this next slide is about my 18 years of experience in this profession, in particular, the past 8 years of being a head coach. My beliefs on culture have stemmed from my experiences as a coach. So as you can see here is just a few bullet points. For me, and I think everybody knows this, it needs to be set forth by the leader. And in my case, it's as a head coach, that starts with me, and it needs to be believed in and carried out by the entire staff. So I can have this vision, I can set the culture, the standards, the expectations, but if I don't have buy-in from my staff, it just isn't going to work. So I think it starts there, and then next, the players need to believe in the mission and the culture of the program as well. So if my staff and I, we have this vision of what it's going to be, but the kids, our players, don't buy into it, it does. I think team leaders on a team play a vital role in creating and developing and sustaining a team's culture. And I think followership, this is something that our staff will become more intentional about going forward. But I really do think it needs to be explained and discussed. And I truly do think culture is affected by a program or by the people in the program. And I believe that it's something that shifts every single year, because you have people leaving your program, you have people coming into your program, and every year you have to be extremely intentional about making sure that you're sustaining the culture that you want. So
Yeah, I love what you talk about there because I think when you're talking to high school coaches or younger coaches, a lot of people don't realize that you have to implement that culture every single
Yes.
year and make sure it's sustained. And so that way your younger leaders can really go. And I think we're going a little more of the leadership development. Start with those younger athletes. I think it's so important to make sure you're growing them and sustaining your culture.
Right, absolutely. And you have to be, you have to be intentional about it. And as we go through this PowerPoint, you'll kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. But this next slide is the importance of developing leadership. I think leadership, effective leadership at that, has a strong impact on the culture of a program. So first point, it starts with me. It starts with any leader. I, as a head coach, I have to be very intentional about making sure I'm getting better as a leader. And that's something that I have to do on a daily basis. I think having strong leadership within a team is a must. I think leadership development, like we mentioned a little earlier, it needs to begin when your players are underclassmen. And I think there's a learning curve to leadership, right? And I think more so for me, while you're grooming your leaders when they're young, when they finally get into that role, the players and the coaches as well, they need to have an understanding that this is new for them, right? This is a new role, and that we have to be understanding to that learning curve. And I think that especially coaches, we really need to emphasize their strengths, because as any leader knows, as soon as you step into that role, people tend to look at everything you don't do right, and they focus on the negatives versus saying, hey, here's all the things you do right. So I think it's so important for us as coaches to make sure that we're spreading that message to our athletes. And like I said earlier, effective leadership leads to a strong culture. So I think it's important for a coaching staff and for an entire staff to have goals, because I do think it's a culture, or it affects it. So for us, developing strong, independent women who are going to be equipped with all the necessary skills to become great leaders. Our goal is to prepare student athletes for the real world, and help them be successful in the classroom and graduate champions. We want every kid leaving our program having gotten a great holistic experience and leaving with a ring on their finger. So for us, it's about, I got to make sure that my entire staff is all on the same page with what we're expecting to do. So at the end of it, this is on one slide, this is the culture of Miami softball. So our values and standards, they're the foundation in which the program is built. So when I first came to Miami, I got there, I ended up actually hiring a staff that I didn't even know. So the vision that was set forth was really something that started with me. We needed to have something that was going to bring us together as people. And I think a lot of programs and other organizations have this. Development of people and maximizing their potential. So for our kids, I expect them to be great people first and foremost. I expect them to be great students, and I expect them to be great out on the field. And we do whatever we can to maximize their potential in all three of those roles. I think for us, we serve as leaders in our community, and I expect our kids and my staff and myself to be great representatives of our program and our university. And this is a big one right here, fostering a family-like atmosphere, creating an environment that will allow people to learn, grow, thrive, and have fun, right? So the one thing in our program, and for all coaches, if you're going to go out there and make kids train hard 5-6 days a week for 4 or 5 hours a day, you better be creating some type of environment, where they're also having fun. And just the last thing here, the Red Hawk way, culture of respect, hard work and excellence in all that we do. And the one thing, if you ask anything or anyone about our kids at Miami, they're going to tell you our kids are respectful. And it's funny how habits are created during their time here. And I think all of our kids come into our program respectful, but once they've been in our program for a couple of years, it's there. Yes, thank you. They open our cages and they're saying thank you. They're handing each other, so it's a pretty awesome culture that I believe that we have at Miami. So, but again, I think it's really important. It's not important to define culture, but it is important to put it down, write it down, and say, here's what we're going to be about. Because in order to plan and in order to be intentional about culture development, you have to know what you're building around. So I'm not going to talk very much about this because I think everybody has values in some capacity. But I will say I think it's important for people to work on those values that you have. So for instance, number 8, discipline. That's a big part of our program. So every December, our team, we always do what we call Discipline December. And it stems from our values as a team. So we sacrifice one thing and we dedicate and commit ourselves to something else in the month of December. With accountability, that's huge for us. So every summer, and they actually, for next year's team, they have been put into their accountability groups. So we have fun with it in the fall. They have them throughout our fall, but in the summer, it's something that's used to make sure they're checking in with each other, and especially now in light of COVID, just making sure they're just checking in, probably even a little more so. But again, I think it's one thing to have your values, but it's another thing to be intentional about having your kids first know what they are and working on it as a group.
Can you speak a little bit to how you develop and come up with all of those values? Because I know a lot of coaches, everybody wants to use their own values. And so you kind of went over briefly what yours were, but how would a coach be able to actually figure out what their team cultures are? And we're going to go into talking about standards as well. And I think that question can be kind of stem off of that, of how do you come up with team core values and standards and what you're going to hold your team to?
It's such a great question. And it's something that takes a lot of thought. You know, as a leader, you really have to have a vision as to what you want your program to stand for. I think there's a lot of soul search that goes on with that. And I know as an assistant, I did a lot of pre-planning. My dream has always been to be a head coach. So I was doing a lot of that prior to even becoming a head coach. So the one thing that I would say to assistant coaches is make sure that you're already planning to be a head coach by thinking about what do you want the culture of your program to be about? And as all of us, we learn from different people. But yeah, to be honest, it was just something I sat down and I thought about, this is what I want my program to be about. And that's kind of how I came up with it. And I think studying and looking at other programs that have been successful, that played a large part in how I came up with what I came up with. Watching YouTube, I mean, I am a learner. I am learning as much as I can. So I think, again, just learning what it takes to be successful in what other people have done to be successful, and thinking about your values as a person, right? So I think that had a lot to do with what we came up with. And these are things that I expect our kids to know. It's not just words on a paper. We talk them. It's a part of our language. I mean, especially our standards. I mean, if you hear our team communicate, we are talking every day about, hey, what are we doing today to be a good teammate? Hey, how are we getting 1% better in the classroom and out on the field? So it's a pretty cool thing that we have at Miami. But again, if you truly believe in your values and standards, it's something that it should be a part of your team's language with one another, in my opinion. So next thing is preparation. So for us, our season is typically in the spring. Obviously, this year was a little different, but summer preparation, we're all in different periods. But I think being able to do the things that I have on the slide. So self-reflection, evaluation, that's the first thing. You have to figure out, okay, where are my areas of improvement? How can I be better for my team and my program? Then obviously you're looking at teams' performances with win-losses, academics, weights and conditioning. But the key here is the culture and the leadership. Our staff invests a lot of time in constantly, if not daily, reflecting on, okay, how's the leadership? How's the culture? But I do think, and everyone can see on these slides, but these are all important things that you have to consider and plan for the upcoming year. So that again, it's about being intentional in the culture building and development. So it's summer preparation for us as a college coach. This is huge, I'll tell you that. So just the development of staff relationships, it is something that I work extremely hard on every day in building my relationships with the people that are around me. I'm so blessed at Miami to have, first off, an amazing coaching staff with Coach Stephanie Sanders and Coach Morgan Zirkle. But my support staff is equally as fantastic. And I tell you, it's the best part about Miami. is the people I get to work alongside of. But yeah, I think the development, your ability to sustain relationships and continue to build is important. And I think the last one, that empowerment piece, is so huge. And for me, I tend to micromanage a bit. And one thing I've had to become more intentional about is letting things go and giving my assistants that sense of empowerment. But something, again, I think all of us as leaders definitely need to make sure that, we're working hard on, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that you want to have your back. Okay, so with our team, I think obviously this comes with planning. I think all of us were doing team meetings, team meals, having fun days at practice. So again, if we go back to what our culture is, it's, hey, creating a family-like atmosphere. That's why we have a ton of team meals, but also having fun while we're working really hard. So fun days at practice for me, we are very intentional about, hey, we've been grinding for about 5 days straight. Next practice, let's make sure to ease up. Let's do something to have fun. Again, a part of our culture is being role models in our community. So because of that, you have to be proactive in planning out the community service events. Again, scavenger hunt. Sometimes you got to get your kids away from the field and go have some fun with them. Again, I think all this stuff, and I'm going to talk a lot about the motivational side, but I think ultimately all these things that we do in our program affect our culture. Okay, so, building relationships. I think concepts are important, right? So any coach is going to tell you that building relationships are imperative. So I don't know if Coach Chuck from our football team is going to be doing the brown paper bag assignment, right, with his student athletes, but for us, it was a pretty successful task that we did with them. And you can see in the slide behind our speaker, there's a bunch of brown paper bags, and it was kind of our way to get to know one another. And the other thing is, you can see Allie here. She's one of our student athletes, but she was reading hers. So this is a twofold thing for us. It's, hey, on the paper bags, they wrote things that they thought people knew about. On the inside were things that maybe we didn't know. So there's two things going on here. We're building relationships, getting to know one another, but she's doing public speaking, right? And most college kids don't really prefer the public speaking. So for us, our kids talk a lot in front of either our team in group settings, but we're intentional about that planning because we're trying to prepare them for the real world. So we have to be doing things that's helping them with that. Now, my kids don't see this as coaches preparing me for the real world because I'm doing public speaking. I don't really think they realize that until they leave and they realize, you know what, I spoke at practice a lot. So again, I think, everything reflects back on the culture and what we're about at Miami. Our leadership systems, obviously, I said earlier that's something that, so I am not a believer in one set system. We change our system every year, depending on the group that we have coming in. So the last, not this past year, but the 2 years before that, we had a lot of our underclassmen made up a big part of our team. So in years like that, we've gone to a leadership council, which we've taken a representative from each class, just because we had 2 years ago 15 kids that were either a freshman or a sophomore, and we felt like it was important because they needed to have a say in what was going on with the team. In 2016, fortunate to win a championship that year. And our seniors, we had outstanding seniors that year. And we said, you know what, you guys roll with it, right? You guys have trained, you're ready for that. You guys are going to be the captains that year. Some years, this is the system we're actually going to go to next year. The captains are going to be picked by the team. But then at the end of it, strong leadership is, within the team is vital. So that's just kind of how we do it. And Jada, this picture that I have of this young lady, she's somebody who's really been stepping up for us and, potentially might be a captain for us next year. So we'll see.
How do you use your captain? So a lot of teams, like I know from like our experience or my experience, there was a team of about 60 girls on the rowing team. And then there was about 6 captains, and each of us were put into groups, and we were in charge of 10 athletes at a time. And we kind of stayed with those groups, accountability groups or teams or whatever you want to call them. Do you use your leadership council and any of that? I know you spoke to earlier a little bit to accountability teams and things like that. Is that how you use your team captains, or what role do they normally play on your team?
Yes, so no, the accountability groups are just kind of many groups within our team, but we're very strategic with how we set those up. So typically we think about the team coming back, and we put kids who we are expecting to be leaders on those teams without them knowing that, if that makes sense. But as far as what our captains or our leadership council, whoever the leaders are that year, our dynamic is a little different than yours because we only have about 20 kids. So we expect them to lead in all, with the entire team. So not necessarily just individual groups, but, you know, our expectations of them, which, you know, that's going to vary, but they pretty much serve as the liaison between the coaching staff and our team. So if there's something maybe we need that they want or we're not doing, we expect them to say, hey, coaches, here's what we see. But, you know, our captains are also the ones that step up in practice. If maybe things aren't going great, those are the kids that we are expecting to kind of just say, hey, let's figure this thing out. But logistically too, right? So they're the ones kind of giving others responsibility on things that they want to do. So I think our captain system, you know, they have a lot of responsibility to lead in our program. So, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work for them to be able to do it. But yeah, we're fortunate to just have just a great group of kids at Miami and just great captains right now. So, all right, next thing, leadership development. And the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about some things that I think have been very beneficial for our program that's helped with our culture. So if you're looking for a way to develop leadership, our team went through Strength Finders, which is something that people in corporate America do this as well. But it basically was a 6-week training for our team. And the notion or the theory behind it is to focus on what people do well versus what they maybe don't do well. And I thought it was great. It was great for our team. And I was really thankful that, you know, we did this. We have a leadership institution on campus that's separate from athletics. So we had the leader of that department come over and speak to our kids, and it was phenomenal. This upcoming year, our athletic department is starting a leadership development program within our athletic department. So I think that's going to be awesome. But in short, I think finding some type of leadership training for your team is really important. So team meeting, just kind of revisiting culture. I think it's important for you for just to ask their kids this program, because if you're communicating one thing and your kids are saying something completely different, you really have to kind of think about, okay, are we have to be on the same page with this? And right now it doesn't seem like we are. But so one year we had the freshmen come in, this is first meeting, and I'm just asking them, all right, what's the culture of Miami softball? And these were just a few things they said. And if you look back at our cultural side, I was really impressed because what they're saying is basically what we're about, right? And actually this just came out yesterday, but our kids did a podcast, or they did an interview with one of our athletic department representatives, and it was awesome because they started talking about our culture. And as a coach, when you hear your kids basically saying the things that you're saying to them, I think it's one of the most rewarding things you can have. So to hear my kids talking about family and we worked hard and we're going to stay in this thing together, it was pretty awesome. So, you know, the overall message in this is just make sure that your kids are hearing what you're communicating and that you all are on the same page. So another thing that we did, I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's really important for leaders to look at what other organizations or teams are doing to be successful. But I also think that it's important for your team to do it as well. So I think when it comes to culture, you know, you got maybe some first-year head coaches who are trying to create culture, some who are trying to sustain culture, some who are trying to rebuild. And to be perfectly honest, we kind of had a rough year. So we used this project when we needed to rebuild a little bit. So we had, and it started with the coaching staff, we had our staff, we broke up into groups. We all picked different groups that we thought had been successful. And we basically did some research and studied, like, what are they doing? What is Alabama football doing to be successful? And this is just kind of a couple of notes that we pulled from there. We had a discussion about it. So it was really cool to see the groups that our student athletes picked, because this is what they picked. They picked Disney, they picked Google, and then the other two picked UConn women's basketball and Chick-fil-A. So they had some ownership in trying to figure that out. It wasn't just coming from the coaching staff, like, hey, here's what other teams, here's what other programs are doing. When they were able to see that for themselves, I think it made a pretty big difference. But I think planning things to do with your team for them to have some ownership in what you're doing is extremely important. So I know we're all about, everybody's reading books. This is a book that I highly called Legacy. And it was actually recommended to me by our field hockey staff at Miami, who's very successful program. I love just hearing about the things that they do. But if anybody knows anything about rugby, the New Zealand rugby team is traditionally one of the best teams in the world. And they hit a rough spot where, they went through a rebuilding phase. So I think, too, it's just so hard to sustain success. But basically, this book is about, they had a tough year, and then they really had to revamp and relook at the culture of the program. And that's what this whole thing is about. So if anybody out there is in a rebuilding phase, I would highly suggest reading this book. So these are just some of the things that came out of it. And we as a whole team read this. It was actually their winter break assignment. We probably a week's worth of classroom sessions on this book. But Sweeping the Sheds, which is basically, people aren't going to do our job. If I'm going to be the one sweeping up after practice, I'm going to be the one cleaning up the locker room. We don't need anybody else, because we take pride and passion in what we do. And it's a pretty similar message to what we tell our kids in our program. Just basically staying together. No one is bigger than the team. So many different things that we were able to take from this book. So again, if you're looking for a book to read, I think this is a great one for culture. And then with all those things that we did and looking at different groups, our staff came up with 5 main points to that. And this is kind of something we created going into our season. And we have 2 of our alum here as examples, and this is Nick Foles, and maybe there's some football coaches on here, they probably know his story, but he was the backup quarterback for the Eagles, and I think it's Carson Wentz there. Anyways, we just thought that he was a great example of our 5 practices, and my staff and I, we sat in our office trying to figure out, what are we going to call these 5 words that we've just come up with? And we went with practices, because if you actually look at what the word means, it's an application of an idea. So we told our kids, we preached 5 practices every single day. It doesn't mean anything to just put the words on the paper, just say it. We really have to bring these 5 things every day. And if we can do that, we're going to be successful. So again, how does this affect culture? Well, we have to create team cohesion, right? So I'm big on team mantras. Let's figure out a way to get our kids to come together. So this was one thing that we did to accomplish that goal. I'm big on signage. You can come into our Philly lines on a daily basis. We got signs that are there all the time. But again, it's about unifying your team, and how are you doing that? And this is just one of ours that actually, till this day, this is still in here. And if you can see the hashtags, those are 2 things that our student athletes came up with. So again, it's, yes, things need to come from the staff, but things also need to come from the team. So preseason training challenge. So this was just the challenge that we proposed to our team when they came back from winter break. So again, you're going to expect them to work hard, give them something to work hard for. And I think my kids are, they're extremely intrinsically motivated, but the more motivation you give them, the more you're going to get out of them. So going back to the culture piece, we are trying to bring and maximize our kids in all aspects. And obviously as softball players, this is one way that we feel by the motivation side of it. This is how we're going to maximize their potential and get the most out of them. So basically, I won't go into depth about the slide, but if they were successful in obtaining this goal that we gave them, there was a reward at the end. So of course, they were a little bit more motivated every single day that they showed up to practice because they knew that there was something, in the 4 weeks after training. So we talked about our 5 practices, and I'm not going to go into detail about this slide, but the biggest takeaway from this is if you want your kids to be energetic, show them, tell them what that looks like. If you want them to be resilient, you have to give them examples of what that is and what that looks like, right? So if I want my kids to work hard, I got to tell them what I mean by what I think works hard or working hard is. So I just think it's really important to make sure we're communicating with our kids. So this is just us telling them, hey, so what we did too, we told them about the 5 practices, but we didn't give them the challenge until later because our staff went through a whole week of practice, writing down different examples of what the 5 practices were, so that when we told them, hey, here's what we're looking at, they actually were like, yeah, that's, grit. That's when Morgan's laying out hard after a ball. Haley, I think she probably made a great catch in practice. So again, giving them examples is huge. In season, I'll just go through a couple of things. And again, it's motivation, but I am a strong believer that as coaches, you need to motivate, you need to inspire, and you need to encourage. So I do think you have to be intentional about the things that you're doing with them. I think, I've obviously never, even more so as a female leader, bringing together a group of females, I think this is a huge part in what makes our program successful, is because I do feel we get the most out of our kids every day because we're finding ways to motivate and make things fun. So I'll just touch on the glue guy. That David Rossi, and I'm sure everybody knows him. He was a catcher for the Cubs, but there was an article that he came out with talking about the glue guys in Major League Baseball, and basically it was the Dustin Pedroia, I think Carlos Beltran, I think Yadi Molina from the Cardinals, but it's who on the team is bringing the group together, right? Who's the glue guy? Who's the one that when things aren't going well, who's the guy that everybody's looking towards? So we did an assignment with the glue guy, and if you can see it here, every week we had team leaders, and this is in season. So every Monday or Tuesday, whenever that first day of practice was, we had people chosen to talk to the group. Again, twofold, right? It's public speaking, but it's also, we want to hear their thoughts. They served as a motivator for the team that day. And the glue guy, right? They had an opportunity to nominate who was the one that kept the team together when we went down 5-0 in the first inning. Who was that person that was the one that just corralled us all together? So again, we have a lot of discussions at Miami, but I do think that it helps us with our camaraderie as a group. Step by step, I think, at least for us, we have series, 3-game series. So I think it's really important for us to focus on one game at a time. So if you're going to play a team 3 times, we wanted our kids to keep their vision narrow, right? So after each game, this is a foot, and we hung this all up in our indoor during season, and they would write something that was motivating, like, hey, get it done again, or hey, bounce back if maybe we didn't win. And it was pretty awesome. And I'm just going to reflect back on the podcast or the interview that my athletes did yesterday. But one thing that they had mentioned when the gentleman had asked them about our success, one of my kids goes, you know what? We didn't even really know what our record was because we were so focused on the process. We were so focused on playing that one game. So, it starts with your coaches communicating that, like, guys, we got to focus on the process. But to hear your student athletes actually were focused on that and not looking too big, it was pretty awesome. So obviously our season got cut short, but this year we kept our 5 practices, and it was all about elevating it. How are we going to get better with our 5 practices? And this year, our big push with them was developing a warrior mindset. And I'll just kind of give you a sneak peek as to what that looked like. So this was more about kind of mentality. And my staff and I, we've taught a lot about what is it going to take? What is this going to look like when we came up with this warrior mindset? But the first thing, there's 3 components to what it is: loyalty and faithfulness, devotion. So for our kids, the main takeaway from this was no matter what, we have to stay loyal to the cause. So the cause is the program. And at Miami, I am, and we are all very program based. This is not about me. This is not about just our student athletes. This is the program. We take a lot of pride in that. And we talk a lot about taking pride in what we do, but not only being loyal to Miami, but also being loyal to your teammates, being loyal to your coaches, and explaining to them what does that actually look like. So if you get into a disagreement with your teammate, right, is that I'm going to go to my other teammate and start talking about what just happened. That's not really being loyal. That's not being loyal to the cause. So if I make a bad decision in a game, a bad strategic move, which I am guilty of doing, are you going to go and say something to your team about, wow, I just don't believe in coach anymore, right? So yeah, it's being loyal to the cause, but I think it's so important to talk through things like that, because in any team setting, those are the things that can bring the culture down. When you don't have that discussion and try to hit it or prepare them for those hard situations, it doesn't work, right? So again, that loyalty piece, it's not just being loyal to the cause, but it's trying to figure out, how do we keep them together when things are hard? What if we lose 3 games straight? Are we staying loyal to each other and still believing, or are we just giving up on each other? So that's the first part of our warrior mindset. Courage. And I think especially when it comes to female athletes, to be able to act without the fear of failure. I think in all of our kids, you know, they are so want to please, and they just don't want to mess up because of their drive to be great. But we talk to them about this, like, hey, yeah, you're gonna fail. It's okay, as long as you give everything that you've got. I had one of my student athletes yesterday text me. I mean, she had a GPA over 3.0. She didn't think it was acceptable. I could have done better. And, you know, I responded, hey, did you give everything that you had to your schoolwork this semester? And she said, absolutely. I said, you know what? It's okay. You didn't get a 4.0, but that's fine. But I think, especially if you're leading female student athletes, you really have to talk to them about being courageous and not being afraid to make a mistake. So courage is a big thing that we talk about, obviously out on the field, but you know, everything that we do within our program, it's not just about the softball field. It's what are we doing in the classroom? It's how can we be courageous outside of that, right? So public speaking is always a big one. You know, we've had conversations with them about, hey, some of our kids said, coach, you know, I have a fear of it, but I'm going to get better, and I'm going to work on it a little bit more and put myself in that uncomfortable zone. So anyways, courage, right? We think strength, and we think we're pushing weights in the weight room or passing conditioning tests, but the word strength, there's so much that it encompasses. And for our kids, can you go and maybe not do well on a test and be able to come to practice and forget about the test and be mentally tough enough to say, you know what, or emotionally strong enough to say, I'm at practice, I got to focus on this. So we talk to them a lot about the strength side of it as well. But yeah. And then last slide here, this, I think everybody, if you look at this chart, you have an idea of the concept of it. And for us, we talk about Thrive Zone. And I think what this helps with is just getting our student athletes to step outside of their comfort zone, right? And being able to opt into this Thrive Zone, because that's the area of growth. That's 1% better. But we talk to them again about this all the time. And just practically speaking, I'm a pitching coach. So even in our bullpen, I will tell our pitchers, we talk about Thrive Zone out there. So if my pitcher throws a bad pitch and I see her body language be negative or she's frustrated with herself, my language to her is, hey, we got to opt in, right? We can't stay in this red zone where we're frustrated. You have to have the ability to be resilient and opt into the thrive zone within one pitch. Because when we step out on the field, if she gets a bad call from the umpire and then she goes a whole inning frustrated, it's not a good thing. So again, there's so many different things that this applies to, and all this. And again, I think a lot of people will listen to me and will say, man, it's a lot of motivational things. But again, you have to find ways to motivate, to engage, and inspire your kids. And so yeah. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how we roll down at Miami. So
yeah, I love that, and I think you gave every coach that's listening and anybody that's listening so much information of how you've built your team. And I think the baseline of what you did and what you showed us, one of the biggest things that any coach can take away is how well thought out you've and how much time you put into developing your team culture. I know at Titan, every time we work with a team, every time we work with a coach, one of the biggest things that whenever we're doing any kind of consulting or player work or anything like that, one of the biggest things we always talk about is building systems and processes.
Yes.
So how are you going to do that? And when you implement a culture, how are you going to make sure you're speaking to it and your athletes know what you're talking about? And, when you're developing leaders, are you doing it consistently and doing all those types of things? And I think that's the biggest thing that anybody can take away from our talk is that if you're a coach, you need to figure out what culture is going to work for you and then implement it step by step. And over the years, it's going to become more and more defined over what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that was perfectly put, Madison. And, for me, was I doing all this year one? Definitely not, because I just had no experience in what it is. But I think as leaders, you continue to grow, your systems get better. And I listened to Coach Urban Meyer's podcast, and it was fantastic. And, the one thing he talked about is, as coaches, we all have X's and O's for our offense, for our defense, and baseball and softball for our pitchers. But there really needs to be a systematic approach to leadership. And, I just kind of showed you all just our systematic approach to building our culture and what that actually looks like. And it's one thing to just have a thought or talk about what you want, but it's another thing to put your words into action and be very intentional about building and developing. So again, I love the topic of culture and leadership. It's such an important part of any team, any program, and any organization. So just, again, happy to have had the opportunity to talk today with you.
Yeah, Coach, thank you so much for hopping on with us. We really appreciate it. I think it was a great opportunity for us to be able to work with you and talk to you. Thank you for joining us on the Titan Leader Talk. Be sure to download the Titan Leader app. You can find it at the App Store. We appreciate it. And thanks for joining us, Coach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.